Hello, everyone. Good morning. All right. So yesterday we have started with the basic introduction, how the Salesforce architecture would work in real time, how much effort do we require in terms of coding, in terms of non-codings, and why should we move on to learn the coding, the customizations? What are few of the things that are merely not possible with the non-coding environment? What is an Apex programming? In which category the Apex actually falls? So these are few of the things that we have learned as a part of basic introduction about developments. Now let me take you to straightforward to the data types. Data types is something, this terminology is at least something what you already what you already know. And how I'm saying this, that you already know this. If you would remember, we have created all these custom objects. And inside an object could be a custom, could be a standard. It could be any standard object, could be a custom object. If you are creating a new field inside that object, what was the process? You first of all would go to that object, expand the first.com quick access menu, and then you have an option called as view field. You can go with view fields or new. So whenever you are attempting to create a new field inside an object, it would first of all ask you, what is going to be the data type of that particular field? So all these options, what you have seen, that represents a data type, that represents a data type for a particular field, right? We have created so many of them. Like we have created currency, checkbox, date, number, phone, single select quick list, multi-select quick list, text and all that. These are what? These all are data types. Even in your relationships also, your formula, auto number, roll-up summary, all these are what? These are data types. So this terminology data type, at least I hope, is not new. And this is not something that you are learning for the first time. You know this, but in a different perspective, in a different circumstances, in a different environment, we have discussed what is a data type. Now, similarly, when we are moving forward with the programming environment, we first of all were going to learn something called as data types. Now, see, in terms of programming, data can be represented. The data types can be represented in two different forms. The first is primitive and second is S object. Primitive data type and S object data type. Now, before even starting with this, see all of the thing, whatever you are looking over here, auto number, formula, roll-up summary. These are something called as front-end data type. These are something called as the front-end data type, the representational data type. These are called as front-end data type. They are also called as representational data type. And by the way, let me come to one more important point. And this is something where I wanted you to mark my words. All of these data types, whatever is written over here, auto number, formula, roll-up summary, relationship fields, checkboxes, currencies, date, text, phone, pick list, URL, locations, every one of them, all of them internally is represented with a data type called as primitive. That means whatever you have studied so far as a front-end data type while creating a field, whenever inside any object, when you wanted to create a field, in the first page itself, it would ask you to select the data type of that field. So whatever you have selected, whatever field you have created so far, all of them falls under primitive data type. Primitive data type is that data type, whatever we have studied so far. There's one more S object. We're going to discuss this later. When the requirement would comes, then I'm going to have a discussion. Let's now understand what comes under primitive data type. What are the different forms of data that comes under primitive data type? So there are so many of them. Actually, primitive, as the see this statement, primitive is the fundamental data type, is the basic data type of the Apex programming, and it is the most used data type in the Apex programming. Now it consists of all these sort of entities, all these sort of representations of data, like integer, like integer. Now, what is an integer? What is an integer? The integer is a number without any decimal point. I'm coming to that, right? I'm just trying to introduce you. Integer is a number without a decimal point, without a floating point. We used to call this as a whole number. Like you have 25, 36, 89. These are whole numbers. So that is what is an integer. But if I wanted to store a number like 25.32, 3.144, the pi value of pi. So if I wanted to store a number along with a decimal point, then we have another data type called as decimal. What is double and long? They are also like, integer along with double, long along with decimal. So if there is a like, integer is a number without a decimal point, something called as a whole number. But then there is a limit of that. You will going to see that. I mean, when I will come back to, well, I'll come to that particular point, we're going to see. But let me try to give you an introduction, a basic thing. So if it's in a small whole number, we can accommodate it inside integer. But if the number is big, it's beyond the capacity of integer. What is that capacity? We're going to see. Then we use double. If it's a small decimal number, we can store it inside decimal data type. If it's a big decimal number, we'll have to go with something called as log. So these four data types are used to represent numerical quantities. These four data types, integer, decimal, double, long, these four data types are used to represent the numerical quantities. Like integer and double, sorry. They are used for whole numbers. And long and decimal, they are used for floating point numbers. All right. Then similarly, if in any circumstances, if you wanted to store true or false, if you wanted to store true and false, then the data type what we select is Boolean. When we wanted to store date only, when we wanted to store time only, if we wanted to store date along with time, we use this. There are few of the circumstances in programming where you wanted to store the IDs of a record. I'm going to show you where. And then string, binary large object, and object itself. What are these? I'm coming to them one by one, but all these represents what? They are primitive data types. So primitive is that fundamental data type of Salesforce and which is the mostly used in the programming. Now let's see one by one. Boolean, first of all. So Boolean can store only one value, either true, either false. Either true, either false. All right. So if you have design, if you have any checkboxes in any interface, I don't remember, do we have any checkboxes? Now see, passport required and travel required. These are two fields of data type as checkbox. Now there can be only two possible things. I can check, I can uncheck, or I can remain it as unchecked. Now, if this is a field, whose data type is checkbox, now checkbox is what? That is front-end data type. But internally inside metadata, this field would have a data type called as Boolean. This field internally have a data type called as Boolean. There is one important concept I have to explain. Let me first of all come to this, and I'll have to explain you one very important concept. I'll come to that as well. Don't worry. See, so passport required. This is a field inside an object. Travel required is also a field. What is a data type? What is a data type? The data type is checkbox. But checkbox is a front-end data type. Internally inside metadata, internally inside the Salesforce metadata, this is represented with a data type called as Boolean. Now, Boolean can have only two values, either true, either false, either of them, not two. It could be either true or false. Like, for example, अभी जैसे आप देख रहे हो कि passport required को मैंने इस field को check किया, travel required को uncheck छोड़ दिया. So this would actually means कि inside in metadata, inside passport required is true, travel required is false. So whenever in programming we have certain this kind of requirement, we define it with Boolean. Right? That is what is a internal data type. Now the next is string. String. String can store merely everything. String can store merely everything, whether it's a collection. Actually, it's a collection of characters. Now, when we say characters, it includes everything. It includes text, ABCD, that is small and capital. It includes numbers from 0 to 9. It includes every spatial symbol. So whatever you see on your keyboard, A to Z, 0 to 9, and then every spatial symbol, it includes everything. So there are so many different data types, like I'll take them one by one. For example, name. Now this name, I would going to type something over here, but that would always be a name, right? Isn't it? Position status is a pick list, but all of the values over here, they are in the text form. Contact number actually is a number, but why I'm saying this is also. So basically, every text field, though it's a text area, long, rich, encrypted, whatever. If you have created any text field in your interface like this, all right, like email ID, like name. So if you have created any text field, the internal data type of that is string. If you have any phone field, the internal data type is also a string. The internal data type, like contact number I have created. But internally, the data type is also string. Can any one of you make this guessing why the phone field internally is represented using a string? Any guessings on this? Any guessings? See, every text field, every pick list field, whether single select, multi-select, URLs, geolocation, phone, email, auto number, everything comes under string data type. Now, phone seems to be a number. We're never going to write any string in this phone, but still, why phone is in a string? Yes, any guessings? This is the answer. See, in an international number system, whenever you give your number to somebody, for example, if I'm giving my number to my teammates, but they are not from India, I would give my number along with all extensions. So I'll include certain symbols like plus, maybe certain hyphens and all that. I could also include comma. These are what? Plus, hyphen, comma. These are the spatial symbols. When you wanted to mix them, you cannot select the data type as number. Like integer, you cannot select. You cannot select long, double, boolean, decimal. No, that is why That is why if you would create a field whose internal data type is phone, whose front end data type is phone, internally it would be represented using string. Same with URL, geolocations, and then your pick list. So every option inside pick list, whether it's a number, whether it's a alphanumeric value, or it's a text value, everything would be represented internally with a data type called as string, right? Then next is ID. ID used to store record IDs in simple. Record ID. Now we have studied this. Actually, record ID is always of 18 digit. But what you see in the front end, what you see on the user interface is always 15 digit. There are last 3 digits. They are called as checksum that are always made hidden just for the security purpose. So here it seems to be of 15 digit, but you should always remember that every record has an ID of 18 digits. Every record has an ID of 18 digits. So whenever we are in need to store the IDs, whenever we are in need to store the IDs, record IDs that are typically stored inside a data type called as ID. And where do you require this, by the way? See, whenever you would be creating any relationship field, I think in position, do we have it? Yes, we have. Like position is related to hiring manager, isn't it? Position is related to the hiring manager. Like position is related to the hiring manager, like this one. Now this give you a facility that for this particular record, if you are creating a position record, you can select an hiring manager. You can select an hiring manager. And when you would be storing that, what do you think? It would store the name of that. What do you think? It is actually storing the name internally, not. This is just a representational form. See, on the front end, we try to make everything simple. We try to make everything whenever in the front end, in the user interface, when something is getting displayed, we try to make it user friendly. So what do you see over here? That there is a position called as associate Salesforce developer. For this position, Ujjwal is the HR manager. So in the front end, what we see, like, these fields, these are the relationship field and they contain the name of the record. Actually not. Let me fire a query and I'll show to you like what exactly. It is represented in the metadata. Select ID from, let's say, position. Hiring manager. All right. Now see, this is the name, senior account manager. Now this field, hiring manager, this contain what? A005. What is this A005? If I would make a click and I'll see to this, what is this A005? This is a record ID of that particular hiring manager. See, Manish Singh, associate Salesforce developer. I'll have to find it out. Where is that associate Salesforce developer? This one. If I will make a click on this and I'll try to find it out. For this position, who is the hiring manager? Ujjwal. So basically, it's always represented like this. It's always represented like this. Internally, inside database, all of the relationship field would always contain record IDs, would always contain record ID. For representational purpose, the IDs are not displayed in the front end. See, if I would start displaying, if Salesforce would start displaying the IDs over here, then it doesn't seems to be what to say. It doesn't seems to be simple or good for the users. Maybe the user who is looking into this does not understand what is this A005 and all that, right? So that is the reason, that is the reason when they are getting displayed in the front end, they are always, the name would be getting. Even we can pull it out over here as well. I can show you that. I can show you that as well. We can fire a query to get that as well. I'll show you that. See this. See this. If this is the ID, who is this HR manager? If this is the ID, who's the HR manager? We can even do that at the query level. You're going to see this all. So whenever in the programming we would require to store a record ID, we're not going to follow string or number, anything. There's a separate data type for that, and that is ID. So ID would typically store the record IDs of 10 digit or 15 digit, whatever you want. Then for date, for time, for date and time, we have three separate data types. Date typically would only store date value. Time typically would only store time. Date and time store the whole timestamps. When we say timestamp, it includes date along with time. All right. And we have a corresponding data type, a same corresponding front-end data type, date, time, and date and time. Date, time, date, and time. All right. So date and date and time. Don't we have anything for time? No, we don't have anything for time over here. Yes, we don't have anything for the time. No, we have it. All right. So date, time, and date and time. If you wanted to store, so these are the three data types. Then comes the integer, as I've told you. So integer would store the whole numbers, number without any decimal point. But then there is a range, minus 2 to the power 31 to plus 2 to the power 31 plus 1, that's 32. 30. 2 to the power 32. 2 to the power 10 is 1024. Then 2 to the power 16 is 32,000. 2 to the power 32 is a very big value. I mean, 2 to the power 10 is 1 MB. It's a very big number. If I'm not wrong, it's somewhere around 65,536. You can calculate this. 2 to the power 32 is somewhere around 65,536, if I'm not wrong about my maths. So if your number is somewhere around 65,536 plus and minus, then you can use integer. But if the number is beyond that, then you'll have to use long. You'll have to use long. So long, see, and you merely don't require to, remember. See, if you would be learning C programming, in the C programming, I would say that you will have to compulsory know how much internal memory would require for storing integer, for storing long, for storing strings. But here you don't have to take care of this. In the C programming, it was essential for every developer to know this. If you're defining a variable of a particular data type, how much amount of memory it's going to be get consumed. Like in case of integer, it's mentioned that it would occupy 4 bytes. For the long, it would occupy 8 bytes. It would require, in decimal, it would require 8 bytes from the memory. So this, if you would be learning C programming, I'll say, हाँ ये तुमको पता होना ही चाहिए. Why? Because C is completely a procedure-oriented language. Even C++ also. If you would learn, I'll say, हाँ तुमको ये पता होना ही चाहिए. Here you simply don't have to worry about this. Why? See, because whenever we would execute a program, see, understand what we are dealing with. I told you yesterday we are going to learn something called as Apex. The Apex is a cloud-based language. Apex is a cloud-based language. The whole environment of programming, like whenever we do a programming, there are different stages of that. In the first stage, there is a software called as editor. In the first stage, there is a software called as editor. What is the role of editor? Editor would give you that environment where you can type a program. Editor gives you that environment where you can type a program. And for every programming language, there is an editor. For C programming language, there was a blue window. For C++, for Java, there is Java runtime environment. For every language, there is an editor. And whenever, see, we have learned this long back. It was my first lecture when I have talked about on-premise and on cloud technologies, right? Technologies like C programming, C++ programming, Java programming, Python programming, .NETs, SAP up to few models, they are on-premise. That means if you are a programmer, for example, if you are a programmer of Java, if you are a programmer of C language, C++, you would have to first of all install certain things on your local machine. You'll have to install certain on your laptops, on your desktop. And this would give you all those, like, the first thing is always editor. The first thing is always editor. So editor is that tool, a system software, which would provide you the environment essential to write down a program, right? Once you type this program, editor can only give you the facility to type the program. It cannot perform any sort of testing. The second stage of programming was once you type the program, you would save it, and then you would give it to the next stage of programming, that was maybe a compiler, or in some of the cases it was interpreter. So these are some of the software, some of the tools that is used to compile the program and try to find out whether your program is doesn't have any syntax error, it is syntactically true or semantically true. When we say syntax, every programming language has a syntax. Compiler do that. Compiler usually perform syntax checking. Semantic checking is done with some different stages. Now, once the program is compiled, it goes to the next stage of programming. And that may be like something called as a linker or a loader. I'll try to keep it simple. Actually, these are the two separate stages, linker, or maybe a loader. Linker used to link any standard module if you have asked. For example, in a C++ programming, there was something called as hash include. You can ask for some other standard files. So whatever the standard files, if you have asked to include with your program, linker would include that. There were two separate stages for this. Then there's a stage for macro preprocess. And see, we have learned this all in long back in my engineering. When I was doing, there was a subject called as compiler. So that time we have studied this all. I'm not going to elaborate everything because there are so many stages of that. I'm just trying to keep it simple. I'm just trying to make you understand about few of the process, because I'll have to explain you something called as Apex runtime engine. I'm going to open a diagram and let you explain about that. So before that, I'm just preparing a background. I'm giving you a little idea about how the on-premise languages, they do this all process. So you type a program in editor, that program get compiled, that program get converted into machine language, because maybe you are typing it in the C programming, C++, any high level language or any procedure level language. But the compiler doesn't understand that. So that conversion and everything, the runtime engine, they understand something called as binary only, something called a series of 1 and 0, zeros and 1. So that complete part is done by the compiler. Then it has been given to the loader, linker and loader. Now, what does this do? They will load your program into the internal memory called as RAM. So here particularly, your internal memory, like your system memory, your physical memory from the system, something called as RAM, that is being used. For the execution of your program. The memory inside your laptop, your desktop, your system, something called as RAM is used. And that's why the RAM, the another name, the more technical name, the name towards the developers for the RAM is executable memory. Because every program, for the execution, it must be loaded into a memory called as RAM. Every program, whatever the program, if you have created, in case of on-premise language, see, I'm not talking about cloud. So every program, when you create, the ultimate aim of every program is to get executed. And whenever the program needs an execution, it has to be loaded inside a memory called as RAM. This was the reason RAM was popularly known as executable memory. So these were some of the stages, of procedure-oriented language execution. But this, we don't follow this, right? Our program, first of all, we don't have any editor installed in our system. We won't require that. The editor comes in the form of cloud. So when you go with developer console, this is that editor. This is that editor, this is that editor where you are going to write your code. So do I have installed anything? No. How I can access this? Cloud. My editor is available on cloud. All right. My editor is available on. Do you see this? There is an URL. There's an URL. My own company 32/dev/add developer edition.mysalesforce.com. This is called as domain. This is custom domain. When you are in Classic, it's okay to have custom domain. When you would be learning Lightning, in Lightning, it's compulsory to have your own domain. In Lightning, you're compulsory to have your own domain. You would be going to learn how to create your own domain, like ICICI.com, SDFC.com, BajajFinServer.com. So they have their own domains. How to register a domain, you would be a part in Lightning. In Classic, it's good to have that. No, there's no issue in that. But anyways, that is not a topic right now. So this is what is your browser. This is another window. And whatever it is pulling out, it's pulling out somewhere from a location. So what is going to be happen? See, your program, you are going to type it on cloud. It's going to be executed on the cloud. Your runtime engines, they are not present inside your system. Everything is present on cloud. Something called as Apex runtime engine. I'm going to talk on that as well. I'll open a diagram and going to talk on that. So Apex runtime engine would be responsible to compile your program and everything. And the result would come into that window itself. So everything is coming, everything is coming from the cloud, on the cloud. So you merely don't have to worry about how much memory it is consuming, because it is not consuming anything from my RAM. It's actually taking server memory. And there's an enormous memory in server. It's a very huge memory. It's enormous, big, large, bigger, bigger, large. And then comes enormous, huge. So there's a plenty amount of memory over there. We just don't have to worry. So don't go and learn this whole faltuki thing. You just have to learn what are the data types available. All right. Then comes double and all and blob. I have few more minutes, so let me try to finish out this. Blob is called as binary large object. We have an object called as document, isn't it? We have an object called as document. The code was 015. 015. What does this document object is used for? What does this document object is used for? Any file, image, PDF, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, text, audio, video. All these were known as static resource. All these were known as static resource. So if you wanted to upload any static resource, you can make a use of an object called as document. You can make a use of an object called as document. We uploaded all these files. They were image files. They were image files of PNG type, JPG type, JPGE type, whatever. So anywhere in your requirement, anywhere in your business need, if you wanted to store a static resource, you can use inside, you can store it inside document object. Document is only available in Classic. In Lightning, you're not going to find it. Then where in the Lightning, where can I store this? In Lightning, there is a separate place. No, the name itself is static resource. The document object, the scope of using document object is only inside Classic. In Lightning, you would not going to find anything called as document. There is something called a static resource. The name itself is static resource. Actually, the name is only changed. Rest of the things are same, but there is no document. There is static resource. Anyways, so if this is a file, this is an image I have stored. Say internally, this image is in the form of binary. This image is in the form of binary. Machine language, binary language, series of zeros and one. So that every type of such a resource, every static resource, though it's a file of text, though it's a file of image, sound, video, internally they are being stored with a data type called as binary large object. So it would allow you to store all these files. Go with them. Then we have a data type called as object. Object itself could represent a data type. How come? You would going to understand with practice only. And as object, I'm not going to discuss you right now, because you, at the end of this discussion, maybe you could get yourself confused between object and as object. So I am only discussing object. I'm keeping it pending for asynchronous data. When we are going to start with asynchronous programming, that time I would going to have a discussion. I know where to discuss what. You don't have to worry about. If I'm keeping it pending right now, I'm actually not skipping. I'm skipping because I know where to discuss that. All right. So there, in upcoming days, there would be a topic called as asynchronous programming. We're going to learn something called as batch program, schedulable program, queuable interfaces, flex queues, future method. There would be 5 topics into that. That time I'm going to have a discussion on as object. Right now, what you have to understand, object itself is a data type. If I would say account is an object. Account also represents a data type in programming. What is this terminology is known as? I'm going to elaborate this a little more by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is what? Today is what? Wednesday. All right. So I'm going to elaborate this a little bit more by tomorrow morning. For now, to end this discussion, you also have to remember that object is also a data type. And I'm going to have a little more discussion onto this. Don't worry, by tomorrow. All right. So tomorrow we're going to start with variable declaration. I'll try to finish this as early as possible. And then operators. I mean, these are some of the basics of the programming. We need to finish this as soon as possible, because there are lots many things into, I mean, when it starts with so many of the things. All right, no problem. Yes, any questions you wanted to ask? Yes, any questions? Any questions? Any questions? All right, then. Thank you so much for joining. Have a nice day.